I want to talk today about how prayer is much more than a mere stress reducing technique. It's not just positive thinking. I was telling somebody recently about what I do, helping to heal and uplift people through prayer. And that individual had the sense like, oh, that's a wonderful thing. And then they started to talk about stress relief and that prayer could be a kind of way to think more hopefully and think more positively. And what I'm going to share with you today is much more than positive thinking. There's a little analogy that came to my thought that just happened to me just a few days ago, really. I was trying to get something done on my computer, and a particular application just wasn't working. And I was trying and trying to get it to work, and no matter what I did, the application just didn't work. And I was trying to think positively and kind of not just give up. If I was thinking negatively, and maybe I'd just get angry and give up. But positive thinking was helpful at that moment, and I was able to think maybe there's another solution. I tried a couple different applications, but nothing quite worked. And then as I sat back and thought about it, I thought, you know what? There might be an update to my operating system. And I ended up updating my whole operating system. And then that application instantaneously worked. Not only that, but there were new features, there was new capacities that were available to me on my computer instantly. I think of prayer as updating our operating system. On a computer, everything that's appearing on the screen comes from the basic code of your operating system. And if you want to get an application to work that's not working, often it takes an update of the operating system, and it takes a new code. And we're going to take a look at the way that Jesus operated. Jesus operated from a standpoint that life is spiritual and that it comes from spirit. Most people are operating simply in the belief that life is material and that matter creates and sustains life. And from that standpoint, I think we have limited capabilities. Often things in our life just are erroneous. They don't work quite right. But one of the things that shows up right away if you read the Bible is that Jesus was a healer. Every gospel, it just tells about the life of Jesus, and he went around healing and helping people through a mental activity that he called prayer. And prayer is more than just sitting down and quieting one's thoughts and letting the bad thoughts kind of go by. It's more than just a mere meditation technique or technique of stilling the human mind's rampant obsession with whatever seems to be on the screen of perception. Prayer is getting a whole new basis for operating from. It really is a different standpoint, and it's a better one. It's an upgrade. Throughout history, people have had general intuitions about life that are often informed by our physical senses and have often been so, for example, for most of human history, at least a good deal of human history, people just believed that the earth was flat. They would go out to the horizon line, they would see that the earth is flat, and they would conclude that that's just the truth. And now we know just the opposite is true. It's the earth is a spheroid or a sphere. And what did that take to discover that? It took a new standpoint of operation, you could say. It took a higher heavenly view of things. And if we were to lift ourselves up from earth, if we went up, way out to the outer space, up to the heavens, you could say, you would see for yourself that the earth is a sphere. And you don't change a flat earth to a sphere by getting a correct and higher viewpoint of it. You're just operating from the right standpoint. And so much of life is about getting the right perspective on things. I'm going to introduce a book today to you called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, written by a remarkable lady named Mary Baker Eddy. And she felt that she really caught that perspective from which Jesus operated from, this purely spiritual conception of life and being. And one of the things that she wrote in this book is that our false views of life hide eternal harmony and produce the ills of which we complain. You ever wonder why things aren't adding up in your life or aren't going right? This is an answer to that. It's an inroads to finding some real discoveries about how to bring out harmony in our life. And if it is our false views of life that hide eternal harmony, then it's our correct views of life that bring out and reveal eternal harmony and produce the joys of which we can celebrate. So this lecture, it's going to give us a new basis for our lives to operate from. It's going to provide a new perspective, a spiritual vision of life that I hope really is an upgrade from whatever you might be holding in thought right now. You know, it's so often true that people make snap judgments upon seeing negative impressions of the physical senses, hearing something negative, seeing something negative, and then just jumping to a conclusion, perhaps without going up higher in thought. Some years ago, I gained a penchant for mountaineering. I went out to the Himalayas, the highest mountains in the world, and I started doing one high-altitude hike after the next. And I just loved it up there. I loved being up in the high mountains. It was just an incredible experience up there. And every time I got up to the high mountains, I just, sensed this more capacious, infinite sense of life just being up there. It was amazing. And it just gave me space to pray and contemplate things from a higher perspective. Gave me the opportunity, so much alone time up there. And I often had these books, the Bible and this Key to Scriptures, Science and Health. And as I was reading those books, it just helped me get through some really tough times. In fact, every time when I was up at the high altitudes, I got desperately ill. And every time I would pray with these books, and it brought a real divine sense of comfort. Jesus, in the Bible, he essentially says in the book of John, I'm not going to be with you forever, but don't worry, I will send you a comforter, something that will help you understand my teachings, in other words, and apply them to your life in an effective way. And Mary Baker Eddy, when she discovered what she called Christian Science and wrote it in this book, she felt it was a fulfillment to that prophetic desire and promise that Jesus bestowed upon the people who wanted to follow in his way. And it's interesting, if you couple those two words together, Christian and science, in everyday conversation, people usually think you're nuts because they seem like antonyms. They seem to just be totally opposite for most people. Religion or Christianity, it's about a belief. It's about one's inner subjective special experiences and perhaps their upbringing and their culture. And science is just about the opposite. It's about what's universally true for everybody, that's outside of cultural conception or belief. And it's about the patterns of observable external reality. And it doesn't have anything to do with consciousness, with our awareness, our subjectivity. So for many people, those two things seem to be opposites. Now, I'm going to present a different view here. Science means knowledge. It means what can be known about life. And Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. He was evoking a kind of knowledge that brought results, experimental results, that could be proved through healing and restoration. And it was a particular perspective. It was a premise about life. And the basic premise that Jesus brought out is the basic premise of the Bible, that there really is one source behind everything, one God, one cause, one thing, one being behind everything, one God. And everything that's made really is an expression or reflection of that singular God or cause of life. Now, many people have felt a deep sense of solace with understanding monotheism and trusting that there really is one true divine source behind everything. But I want to present this theory today in a way that I hope really hits home for you, that really brings you home to a consciousness of harmony and of what's right, what you really feel is right inside. Now, many people think that religion is based upon blind faith. But I think everyone has faith, just like everyone has religion. Religion just means finding a binding to your life, finding a way to, a perspective really, that binds the pages of our life together and gives us a sense of meaning and helps us understand purpose and what's real. And I think everyone has religion, atheist or Christian. Everyone has a belief that they're working from. Most people are just looking at life materially. I'm going to try to show why that's not sufficient for our needs. But to think about faith in a way that just means trust. We're all trusting in a perspective. And it's not unreasonable or blind to trust in God. In fact, let's just think this through together. We all belong to the same life. I think we can all agree on that, no matter what perspective we're coming from. We don't create life as individual minds or psyches. Often we think of ourselves as self-made. We think about the decisions we're making in life and that those are going to inform what our life is. And we're often caught up in this belief, I have a life, you have a life, there's another life over there. But if we really step back, we all just are of life. We're all in life and we're all of life. And life is something beyond a personal mind or psyche. And so I think that one life that we're all in and of is God. Now let's explore what this life is. What have you felt in moments when you've really felt at one with life? You've really felt a sense of deep belonging to life. I think we would describe that as moments of love. And the Bible says God is love. When we feel love, love is a sense of home, of belonging, of what something that feels deeply, wonderfully right. And when I use that word right, I actually mean right. Now, things are right about reality, whether I believe it or you believe it. 2 + 2 = 4, it's right for all of us, right? It applies to all of us. And what's interesting about 2 + 2 = 4 is that it's a series of ideas. 2 is an idea and 4 is an idea, and it's really how they relate is an idea as well. Now, think about it. We could write 2 + 2 = 4 on a board, and we could write it in different symbols, Roman numerals or just digits. We could write out that equation in different languages, and there would be different words that would represent that same idea. But the idea of 2 is a universal idea that's needed to creation. Creation couldn't exist without. Now, let's take an even more obscure number. Take 6,342,000. You've probably never thought of that number before. But if you plucked the idea of that number out of reality, if that idea just stopped existing right now, I guarantee you every banking system in the world would just collapse. This computer, this live stream would stop working. That number is absolutely needed in the world. And it's needed to the principle of mathematics. It would be incomplete without it. I think of God as the principle of life. Principle means something that's prime. It just exists. It's eternal, in other words. There's nothing that creates it. Every theory of life needs to have an eternal premise underneath it, that something just is. It can't be explained in terms of something else. It's prime. It's a principle. And so I think it makes sense to think of, just like we think of a principle of mathematics, there is a principle of ideas. You could say a divine mind. Now you might think, well, what are you talking about, divine mind? I'm not sure if I believe that there's a divine infinite mind out there. Well, what created the idea 2 + 2 = 4? Wasn't me, wasn't you, wasn't any animal out there. If that idea exists, an idea must come from a mind. And since it didn't come from any of our minds and it applies to all of us, it needs to come from a divine universal mind. So I think of God as the divine universal mind that creates every eternal idea that's helpful to reality. In fact, I think each one of us are eternal ideas or expressions of God. Just like that number I spoke about, the 6 million number. If you plucked that number out of reality, the whole principle of mathematics wouldn't be complete. And without each one of us, I don't think God or life is complete. So you can think about God as life, as love, as principle, as mind. When Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free, I think that truth underneath everything is God as well. So truth is another word for God. I think often we think of everyone having a soul, but soul is, for me, it's the source of all beauty, creativity. And that doesn't come from any of us. I have a lot of friends who are musicians, painters, and they often talk about their most creative moments seems to come from inspiration so far beyond them. Infinite soul or infinite mind. And spirit is a word that Jesus used for God as well, meaning the opposite of matter. It's not contained in anything. If you talk about matter, what you're talking about is something within life, contained within life, that has limits, has categorical limits to it. So if I'm saying, this book, I can describe it in different parameters, and therefore it is material, it's boxed in. But for something to be spiritual, it means it has no box, it has no container, it's not limited. And so in Christian Science, there's this wonderful definition of God covering all these synonyms. It says God is incorporeal, divine, supreme, infinite mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, love in Science and Health with the Key to the Scriptures. And these different words for God, they're describing the same being from different angles. And in Science and Health, on page 390, it says, "It is our ignorance of God, the divine principle, which produces aberrant discord, and the right understanding of him restores harmony." Well, when I was way up in the mountains there in the Himalayas, I was thinking about God a lot when I was having altitude sickness issues. And I really started to every single time when I was up in those high altitudes and I was reading these books, I felt a sense of divine comfort. I started to get a clear glimpse of God and my own nature as the image and likeness of God. And every time I was healed in some way, sometimes it would just seem like a temporary upliftment because I would get ill when I went back up to the high altitudes. Now that continued until eventually I was diagnosed with a blood condition. And I won't tell you the whole story today, but I prayed about it wholeheartedly, really grounded myself in the perspective of Christian Science, and I started to feel a freedom that started in my inside and just started to be expressed on the outside. And I found myself having full freedom and overcoming that limitation for good. And I haven't experienced the kind of altitude issues ever since. But what I want to share with you today is an experience I had up in the mountains there as I was praying through that experience. Often when we pray about one thing, it's uplifting our thought, and other aspects of our life become uplifted as well. I live up on a tidal river in Maine for a part of the year, and when the tides come up in the river, every boat in the river comes up with the tides. And when we lift our thought to God, we begin to see everything from a higher perspective. Just like when if you lifted yourself up in a spaceship, you would see the whole earth from a different perspective, from a higher perspective. And you'd never look down from the heavens or from a higher viewpoint up above the earth and look at the earth and say, oh, the earth looks ugly today. It would always be glorious, always beautiful from that perspective. And so I met up with a family when I was up in the mountains there that were just the most wonderful, lovely people I'd ever met. And I stayed up late talking about God with them, talking about the deep things of life. And what was interesting was that they had a brother who really had just a black cloud over his head, aggressively negative. And I really wanted a chance to talk to this man, to share some inspiration with him, to talk to him about God, because I had, at this point, seen so many healings through the application of Christian Science. And yet this man seemed so downtrodden, so caught in a echo chamber of his own negative thoughts that he didn't want to talk to us. He wasn't open to talking about God. And anyhow, I never got to talk to him that night. And a few days passed. I hiked back into the village. And then one day my mountaineering guide I had been with on that trek gave me a call, and he said, "Hey, Nate, I'm going to the hospital right now. Something horrible has happened. That man that you met up in the village who was really negative, he had an accident and he's critically injured. He might die. And he said, would you like to come visit him? And I said, of course, of course. And when I got to the hospital, frankly, I was just not prepared for what I was about to see. They were the most graphic, terrible images and sounds of sickness I had ever seen. And it was like walking into a monster Halloween house. I mean, it was just, you wouldn't believe it. And this was especially apparent when I got to this man's room. He was acting like he was possessed by a demon, and he was strapped down to the bed. And what was even more unusual was that everyone in the room just thought that this was totally normal. The doctors, the family members, because they had seen a pattern and regularity to this in their culture. They believed in demonic possession. They saw and witnessed people in their culture becoming demonically possessed. And what would happen often was that they would just be ill and for a few days, and then they would pass on. And so people were coming and saying their goodbyes to this man. And this idea of demonic possession and its reality and its continuity was just this contagious belief in the room. Like everyone was picking it up. And yet, I felt like I was not of their culture. Jesus said, I am not of this world. And I think what he was getting at there was that he didn't believe, he wasn't operating from a standpoint that material beliefs and conditions govern us. He was starting from the standpoint that God, the eternal mind, creates everything in the image and likeness of God. Everything is fundamentally good and stable, just like the mathematics are good, stable ideas. And when we understand mathematics, we can work out from that standpoint and create wonderful things. Now, when I was in that hospital room, I made a vow to myself. I'm going to go back to my hotel room now, but I'm not going to go to sleep until I get rid of all the fear and until I see this man as the image and likeness of God. And I went back to my hotel room. And the Bible says, perfect love casts out fear. And I really felt like fear, it comes from false evidence appearing real, F-E-A-R. And that false evidence that I was seeing in that hospital, that man acting like a demon, I knew he wasn't a demon. But you know what? I also knew he was something more than just a mere chunk of matter. To a material perspective, we don't have a body. We are a body. We're a physical body. And what's a physical body made up of? It's made up of organs. What's an organ? Or organ systems. What are organ systems made up of organs? What are organs made up of? You could just go down the line, cells, molecules, eventually get to atoms. If you looked inside an atom, I think physicists first thought when they looked inside the atom, they were going to find the basic block of life. They thought the atom was irreducible. It was the eternal fundamental thing that everything is made up of. And yet when they looked inside the atom, they found out that it was 99.9999999, many nines, % empty space. You could say in biblical vernacular, Adam, where art thou? And if you didn't catch that joke, the first chapter of Genesis is this beautiful poem. I see it as the keynote of the Bible. It presents how to see life. It just presents, there's one thing, God or spirit, that creates and sustains life. There's this beautiful sense of progress, continuity. And it says that God made all that was made, and behold, it was very good. And there's no but in that chapter. There's no introduction of evil, of dis-ease, of anything that's negative at all. And the chapter ends. It's just this beautiful chapter of just how things express one source. And then it says a mist comes up from the earth in chapter 2. And what does a mist do? It obscures things. You can't really see what's going on. And from this misty perspective, all of a sudden you see a capricious God. You see a God that's more like a man who's in good moods and bad moods. It's a sense of dualism, right? There's even God seems to have a fragmented mind of good and bad. And then this wrong conception of God makes Adam out of the dust of the ground. The Bible talks about dust as matter, as earthly or a dirty perspective, as a wrong way to view things. And, Jesus, parenthetically, once spit on the dust and made some clay and put it on a man's eyes and said, "Go wash that off." And the man came back seeing, who had been blind prior. So, this idea that God made man out of the dust, we can begin to see, studying the Bible, that this is going to be a false conception of reality. This is going to be a lesson, a parable, on really the way things aren't, the way things we shouldn't see things in this way. Well, when Adam's made out of the dust, what does he do? First thing, he falls into a slumber, he falls asleep. And the Bible often talks about sleep as death. Jesus, when Lazarus died, Jesus said he was sleeping. In other words, he was in a state of unawareness to all of us. And so when Adam is asleep, the first thing that he dreams is that woman was created to serve him. He must have been dreaming. He just believes in this conception of superiority, and not only that, but he starts to believe that life is material, so we have to fight for the good. If life is material, if substance is in matter, well, we need to fight for it. And he starts to fight his progeny, and what his kids start to fight together. And all hell breaks loose. Well, the Bible is about how to get outside of hell, outside of misery, outside of division. The Bible says in Psalm 139, "If I make my bed in hell, thou art there." God is there. So if hell is a space where God is not, even that Bible verse says, no, there is no space where God is not. So hell must be a kind of illusion. It's something of our making. It's something that comes from a false perspective. So just like if I was to incorrectly apply the rules of mathematics and say I was building a big building and I was incorrectly applying those rules of math, those eternal principles, and the building fell down. And I said, "Oh, what is this evil? What evil force made this fall down?" Well, it was ignorance, right? It is our ignorance of God, the divine principle, which produces apparent discord, and the right understanding of him restores harmony. In that example, if I really understood the laws of math, I could easily build that building back up. And, likewise, when we really understand God, we can build up our lives healthy and joyous and peaceful. Well, what happened that night as I was praying about my friend who was apparently demonically possessed there, I just started to see that really that image was not the image of God that I was seeing there, that I saw in the hospital. It was not his identity. If you ever read about feral children, children who are raised by wolves or some other animal in the wild, they really start to think they're a wolf, and they'll act like a wolf, and they'll talk like a wolf, and it's because of that cultural belief. They were raised by wolves, and now that boy really thinks he's a wolf. Well, this particular culture, they had this belief that demons are real and that people can catch the spirit of a demon, and then therefore they were acting it out. I had seen a similar thing actually when I was in high school, and a hypnotist came to my school at prom, and they were hypnotizing some of my friends, and the hypnotist was getting them to act in crazy ways. And when they kind of woke up from it, they realized, oh my gosh, that wasn't me. And I think all kind of states of mind that are erroneous are a form of hypnotism. It's kind of a believing in some idea again and again until we kind of stop thinking in our natural state of mind. Hypnotists will get something moving back and forth, just this repetitive nature of things. In a way that's not substantial but can infuse us with a false belief. And that really is the absolute opposite of Christian Science. Christian Science is not one mind affecting another. It's not trying to push a perspective on anyone else. It's really lifting up our thought high enough to really see wholeness and health and beauty as the real vision of life, what's really going on, the real substance of life. And Parenthetically, the word substance and understanding are related. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but understanding and substance, they're both saying the same thing. Understanding, substance. They're about what are we grounding our life on? What is our perspective grounded on? And Jesus, if you haven't read the Bible in a while, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, it's the Sermon on the Mount, and it's a wonderful place to start. I like to call it Jesus' greatest hits. And at the end of that Matthew 7 chapter, Jesus essentially says, if you build your life, in other words, your perspective on things from my teachings, it's like building on the rock, on solid ground. And when the storms come, you're going to stay stable. Things aren't going to get knocked over. Because you've built on the rock as opposed to the sand of false beliefs. Well, anyhow, in prayer that night, I was just praying for this man until all the fear left. And there was just a sense of his right identity as God's expression that really brought a sense of wholeness and peace and continuity to my thought. There wasn't anything fragmented, any sense of separation from good. And I felt this numinous, wonderful peace that came over me, deep sensations of rightness. And what happened next was just wonderful. I shortly after that, I went on a hike, and I passed by this man's village a couple days later, and I went to stop in to see the family and everything, and that man was already back in his village who had been sick in the hospital. Not only that, he had this wonderful, winsome smile on his face. Looked like he was on cloud nine, a completely different demeanor. And it was so cool because his expression really was akin to that same sense of joy that I felt in my prayer that night. And the family was talking about how it was miraculous, but it wasn't supernatural what happened there. It was supernatural, most natural thing in the world. Well, Christian Science, it really shows us something so far beyond mere positive thinking, mere faith healing. It really helps us ground ourselves in a perspective of life that continually brings out good, that life is fundamental. It's not caused by anything else. So often in life, we're caught up in these visions of divisiveness, dualism, good and bad, this sense of conflict. For there to be any pressure or conflict in life, there has to be two powers pushing up against each other. And if monotheism is true, if there's just one power, there's no pressure, no conflict. And so often we just internalize that like good and bad are opposites, light and dark are opposites, but they're not. If you walk out into on a beautiful night and look up at the stars and you see vast darkness all around you, but then these pinpricks of light, it's not how it actually seems. The universe is actually flooded with light. Light is everywhere in the universe. But what we call darkness is our inability through the material senses to perceive light in certain circumstances. You know, when the moon shows up and it's all lit up, it didn't bring any light source of its own. There was always light all around the moon, but when it showed up, it reflected that light that was already there, and then we were able to see it more easily. But that light was already there, right where that moon showed up at. And darkness, it really is an illusion. You know, if you went into a dark cave that had been dark for millions of years and you brought a flashlight into that dark cave and you said, hey, look at this dark cave. It's been chronically dark. It's been dark for millions of years. Darkest thing you've ever seen. And the flashlight shone into that dark cave. It would say, I don't see any darkness. I only see what my light illumines. And I think Jesus, he didn't see any darkness in life. Just like, the Bible says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Jesus, as the perfect expression or manifestation of God, the clearest conception of true man or womanhood, he expressed God so clearly that he shone the light of love wherever he went, and right where there appeared to be darkness or any other experience of darkness, whether it's mental ill health or physical ill health or discontinuity, decay, death. He shone that light of God's love on the situation, and I think he said, that's not what I see. I see something altogether different. I see wholeness. I see health. I see an eternal idea of good right here. I see continuity. I see peace. And then his ability to perceive that really brought it into being. He was operating from a different standpoint where problems were often just instantly solved. And what's so interesting is that so many people have thought throughout the years that what Jesus was teaching was a kind of belief. If you believe in these certain things, then you're a Christian, or then you're saved, or that sort of thing. But Jesus was a doer, wasn't he? He went about doing good, and he said, if you're going to follow me, you need to take up your cross. And he said to his followers to raise the dead, to heal the sick, and that sort of thing. And a lot of people just don't know what to make of that. And they just say, well, I'm just going to sign on the dotted line like I believe this if I want to be a Christian. But Christian Science really shows you in a very logical way how Jesus was perceiving things. The Bible says we can have the same mind that was also in Christ Jesus. And I think that's a promise, because what Jesus was revealing wasn't something just unique to him. It was a science. It was a logical way to view existence. And many of the people that Jesus taught, they did become successful healers. I have a 4-year-old daughter at home, of course I'm just in love with, and on a good day she worships me. She thinks I can meet all of her needs. And even though this is a wonderful stage and I wouldn't want it in any different way, I wouldn't want her to stay in this infantile relationship with me forever. I want her to grow up, to do the things that I've done in life and even greater. And I think Jesus, when he took everyday people under his wings and started to teach them how to view life spiritually, a lot of them just kind of worshipped him. They thought he could do anything. And they thought if they were in his presence, then good things would happen to them as well. But they didn't really feel at first that they could do it on their own. But Jesus' hope was that they would mature spiritually. They would grow up spiritually. And that they would begin to see life as he saw it and do the things that he did, and even greater collectively. And I think in many ways, we've seen that in Christian history, but especially with the advent of this Christian Science discovery that Mary Baker Eddy made. People over the last 150 years or so have been able to heal in ways that have been incredibly consistent and wonderful, and been able to bring out the best effects of life right in the face of death. The world really now is struggling with death. There's a horrible worldwide pandemic that gratefully seems to be slowing down, but has caused the loss of life for many people, and many people are scared they might lose their life. And there's been issues with systemic racist ideas in culture, discrimination in culture, and sometimes that has caused the loss of life. I just opened up to a little passage before this lecture started from the Bible. And this is from Luke 20, and it says, "He," meaning God, "is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him, to God, all are alive." And I think to God, to life itself, it only sees life. Often when people think of Jesus, they think that Jesus died for us. But I don't think Jesus died at all. If you think Jesus died on the cross, you missed the last chapter. It wasn't the point that Jesus died for us. Yes, he did go through incredibly difficult things, laying down himself for others. But the point was that everything he taught was about eternal life. And that really death is a kind of illusion. It's a kind of inability to see light or health or joy or continuity in a certain circumstance. But it's not a reality. If you ever meet people who have apparently passed on, their heart stops beating, and there they are, or corpses on the ground. If their heart starts beating again, and a couple of minutes later, a couple hours later, they usually come back with some wonderful story to tell you, and it's often some wonderful story of continuity, of good, of peace, of love. and they often sense life less materially, less confined. And a lot of people think that heaven is when we die. You know, we die, then we go to heaven. And maybe prayer is just trying to live a good life right now, and then we get the rewards when we die. But Jesus didn't say heaven was in the afterlife. He said heaven is within us. It's here right now. God only makes one moment, and it's now. And so heaven is now. It's in the moment that God makes. Heaven really is perceiving life spiritually. And I want to share with you another example here that really strikes me as heavenly. I had a friend who, we just kept meeting up in these very harmonious heavenly ways in our life experience. And one time we were both looking for an apartment and really going through a struggling time. We both felt like we were in hell. Like we were both breaking up with long-term girlfriends. We had dated for many years and thought we would marry. And after a long, arduous search for apartments, we both rented places right next to each other, and we didn't even know it. And when we finally found out, who each other were and that we were living right next to each other, we were just so happy. We were so happy that coming together, and it really just felt like a God experience, because we started to have these dinner parties, and we were just a wonderful solace to each other. And what happened was, at one moment, in a rather uninspired moment, you could say, he was talking about his girlfriend, and I thought, you should just try to win her back. And he said, actually, I want to read that book that you gave me, Science and Health. I think the answers are in there. And as he read this book, wonderful things started to happen. Instead of looking for love or life, harmony in just one piece of matter, one physical body, one person, he started to realize that love is something so much more than that love is life itself. And materiality says that in order to get something of substance, if life is made of matter, you need to get that material thing back. You need to be in possession of the material thing. And so if you see, if life is seen in a materialistic way, it's about getting more money, getting more resources, getting more, whatever it might be. And spirituality is just the opposite. If life is in the qualities of God, then the more we express those qualities, the more we give them away freely as God gives them to us, the more we will feel that sense of unity, that oneness. So instead of asking for love and trying to get love from one material place, my friend just started to love wherever he was. And he started to feel this more oceanic, capacious sense of love all around him. And, it was great. And he started to just get this sense of grace, that God's love is with him everywhere. It's really defining him, sustaining him. And he had some wonderful healings. In fact, he had a healing of a car crash a couple years later that was really pivotal for him. It really taught him the efficacy of Christian Science healing some more. And then a couple years later, he called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, Nate, can we pray about teeth? Is that fair game?" And I said, "Yeah, you can pray about anything. As you lift your thought up to God, you're going to see it from a healthier, more heavenly perspective right here and now." And so often the belief is that death is final. In our experience, when something appears to die, decay, and then die, there's just really no way of bringing it back, And this is what he was dealing with. He was actually dealing with a tooth issue. He said, "I've been going to the dentist for years and was told each time that that I needed a root canal because my tooth was dead and discolored. The only other option was to have it pulled." And he didn't want to have it pulled. He was low on cash. He was like many people right now. He was in between jobs. He was having some economic struggles, and he really wanted to look at life spiritually, because he knew the ancillary effects of prayer. Prayer is changing our operating system. It's looking at the whole of life in a different way, and things just start to work better when we're working from a higher perspective, when we're looking at life from that same point of view that Jesus had. And so, one of the ways that Jesus talked about identity was in relationship to a light beam. He used this wonderful analogy. He said he was the light of the world. He said that those who followed him were the light of the world. And if you think about a light beam, what's a light beam defined by? It's defined by the source, by its source, by the sun. And without going into all the physics of it, you could say that that light beam is made brand new right out from the sun every moment. And the cool thing is not only is that light beam made from one source, the sun, but that it's defined, everything in it is from the sun. And in fact, if you put a prism up to that light beam, even though it just appears kind of one thing, just white, once you are able to put a prism up to it, you see every color is in that white light, every single one. Just like each one of us expressed every aspect of God: life, truth, love, spirit, soul, principle, mind. And there are other ways to think about God too, like father, mother. So we both have masculine and feminine expression within us. Both a principled, orderly expression and a beautiful, creative one as well. And so what's interesting here is that, and this is the point really to internalize, because it's so easy to define ourselves by material conditions. If you just ask, who is that person? You describe a person to a friend. It's so easy to put them in a box, to think, well, they're this age, they're this race, from this part of town, these are their physical characteristics, these are the different places they've been materially in their life. And it's so easy just to kind of pin them down with these material conditions and constraints and to say that's who they are. And yet the light beam is not defined by any of those conditions. Just think of it. If you say something to a light beam, it doesn't change its nature one bit. Often we think about ourselves in relationship to what we've said, whether people have said about us, whether it's teachers or doctors or professionals in one field or another. And we often think about ourselves as defined by what has materially happened to us in the past, by what's been put into our body perhaps, or by how we've been manipulated. Just think about it. If you try to pop a pill in a light beam or try to whack it, just look how it's shining just a second later. Is it affected at all by what happened in the material past? No, not one bit. And what if you put that light beam into a box, put it into another room and opened up that box, tried to box it in literally? Would it be in that box? No. It's because it's not defined by its past. It is not its past. Very literally, it is not its past. If you look at that light beam, it's brand new, right out from its source every moment. And I think Jesus was inviting us to see ourselves in that light. And in fact, there's that word with spiritual growth, enlightenment. What is enlightenment? It means to be in light, to be of light. And it means also to get rid of baggage from another angle. So often we're holding onto baggage, mental baggage that's not allowing us to see clearly. Like, I don't think spirituality is about actually changing anything about reality. One of the things that this book, Science and Health, says is that perfection underlies reality. Without perfection, nothing is wholly real. I think materialism is kind of like having glasses on that are warping reality. And we see it all around us. We turn every which way and we say, well, it still looks warped over here, it still looks warped over here. But we're holding on to a perspective that's warping reality. And when we get light, when we get rid of those material limitations, those baggages of false conceptions or hypnotic beliefs, cultural beliefs that are holding us back, then we can begin to experience life as it really is and the wholeness and health that's right here for us. Well, as we prayed about this tooth issue, we started to think, I know I did, about things like that there couldn't be any death in my friend, because he was the expression of life, brand new every moment. So that was a lie. And yes, there was an x-ray of this tooth that was dead and it got worse and then died, but that was not the image of God. That's not the image of God. And so we didn't have to accept that. We didn't have to internalize that as substance. Remember, substance is related to our understanding of God, and the right understanding of God restores harmony. Well, after we prayed about this, again, those feelings of rightness, of wholeness, it certainly washed over me as I was praying about this. And to finish the account, my friend said, the day after we spoke and prayed about it, I went into the dentist, and he and all the nurses were baffled. They looked at the x-ray from before and the ones taken that day. They looked into my mouth. They said that the tooth looked perfectly healthy, and I was fine. Nothing further was needed. They said that they had never seen anything like it before in all their years of dentistry. Well, isn't that nice? Again, not supernatural, though. Supernatural. Most natural thing in the world. And what we were doing there wasn't some esoteric, cultural, conceived belief or something. It was really trying to wash away any limited conception that we were holding of my friend and really seeing him as the brand new expression of life, of truth, of love. To try to see him in the same light that Jesus would have, that same Christly understanding. And that produced that conscious experience of love. Now, what's interesting is if you look at life materially, if you think that life is made up of matter, you run into, in philosophy, what's called the hard problem of consciousness. Because there's no way, even theoretically, of how information processing, ones and zeros coming together, or certain circuits turning on or off, or a brain pumping blood, that could somehow create conscious experience. I think a lot of people don't grasp how difficult this problem is. And when people actually get seriously into philosophy, they realize, oh yeah, there's no way to make consciousness out of matter. If you got a computer doing lots of circuits, if you add just more and more circuits, it doesn't all of a sudden just having a sense of awareness in life. And yet, if you just look at what consciousness does, consciousness can create experience immediately. You go to sleep, it's just one mind. And what does that one mind alone do? It creates and governs a whole world instantaneously in your dream. Well, that's just a hint at consciousness is the foundation of experience. What we call matter is just a limited way of viewing form. But when you wake up from a dream, you realize, oh, what you thought was material, in other words, those things in that dream that you thought had independent existence and life and sovereignty, well, those were just mental conceptions. Those were ideas that were being made manifest by a mind. Well, that's a hint at what's really going on right now. I think there is one universal mind that creates and governs us. Well, when I started to read the writings of Mary Baker Eddy, I started to get clear glimpses of all of this stuff in wonderful ways. In fact, at the time, I was studying perennial religion in college. I was on a deep search for truth, and I was picking at the different mystics throughout history and different traditions who seemed to talk about God in an outside-the-box way. And I wasn't really expecting to find any one perspective on life that would be the end-all for me. I was really kind of cherry-picking from lots of different sources and creating my own worldview. And I didn't think anything else was going to happen. But when I read this book, it really felt like a coming home experience. I know a lot of the members of the sponsoring church of this event have been praying about homelessness in their neck of the woods. And whenever you see someone homeless, boy, your heart just goes out to them. And I know especially Christians around the world who are trying to strive to be like Jesus. Jesus just tried to bring love wherever it seemed to be missing. And this is one of my favorite things about Jesus, is that I think wherever he saw love missing in the world in which he grew up in, he felt like he needed to bring it there, because I think he sensed that love was everywhere. There is no substantial dark place in the universe. Darkness is not substantial. It is just our inability to view light in a situation. And so in his culture, I think people thought, well, the tax collectors, don't be loving to them. They're ripping everybody off. They're really off track. Well, what did Jesus do? He loved the tax collectors. He even took at least one of them as his disciple. What did Jesus do when the medical field of his day said, the lepers are cast out, they've got a contagious skin disease, don't touch them, they're contagious. Well, Jesus, through the inspiration of God, divine love, was moved in the right time to go out there and talk to those people, even touch them. And he didn't get that contagious disease. He healed some of them because his understanding of health as the consciousness of God was more powerful than that apparent sickness and that false image. And probably the best one of all is Jesus, right where that women were really not accepted as important in the world in his time. Jesus took women as disciples. He even gives them his most wonderful teachings directly to women, a prostitute, for example. And, there's just a lot of the Samaritan woman, for example, another case where Jesus really shares the teaching called sometimes referred to as the water of life teaching. And this is someone who was not only a woman, but also a Samaritan, someone who was basically a different religion than Jesus was, who the Jews felt really had it wrong. And yet Jesus shared to her indiscriminately, because I think he saw that right where we think love is absent, love is right there. And he said he came to seek and save the lost, because he knew that really no one or nothing is ever lost to God, the principle of life that holds everything in its hand harmoniously. Well, I want to share with you just a little bit about Mary Baker Eddy and a last healing to put a cherry on the cake here, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. Something about Mary Baker Eddy that really strikes me is that she didn't want to be known simply as a personal healer. She healed so many people. There's a lot of great books about her. One that I really enjoy reading is called Christian Healer, catalogs over 300 healings that came about through her healing practice. And it was recorded that she healed people who were born blind, born deaf, healed cancer in its last stages, all through prayer alone. And yet, she felt when she discovered Christian Science that this discovery was something so much more than just the mere demonstration of one individual. Now, to put that in context, imagine if you met a musician who was really just amazing. You were like, wow, I had never heard music like this before. I mean, maybe Mozart back in the day, they made something great, but like this person's right in front of me and they're doing these things I just had never known how to do, and wow. But in this thought experiment, imagine if you didn't know anything about the laws of music. Imagine if nobody did. And people just thought music was a kind of a gift. Some people have the ability, others don't. And really just it's kind of intuition, it's kind of just listening. It's that's where it comes from. And some people have it, others don't. And imagine if that great musician said, you know what? I've discovered the laws of music. There are actual eternal relationships between the notes. Once you understand them, you could play any song in the world, you could read sheet music. It's huge. This is a big discovery. It's so much more than the music that you're hearing, as good as it is. And that would be an even bigger discovery for humanity, because all of a sudden people all around the world would be studying these laws of music and they would be applying them. They could read some sheet music and just play instantaneously these songs. It wouldn't seem mysterious anymore. It wouldn't just be like, oh, some people have it, others don't. It'd be like, no, you can actually train, you can practice, you can study, you can get better. Well, that's what Mary Baker Eddy did for people and in their practice of Christianity. People often talk about being students of Christian Science. And when they read this book and other works by Mary Baker Eddy, they're often studying what they see as the laws of life, the laws of being, the laws of bringing us in right relationship to experience a consciousness of wholeness and peace and love, to really look at life operating from the right standpoint. And so, so many people who met Mary Baker Eddy, they really caught a glimpse of that too, sometimes just instantaneously, where you would think they might just get obsessed with her, because that has so often happened in the history of spiritual and religious movements. Some charismatic teacher, has some insights, and then they start teaching people, and other people get obsessed with them. Now, just to bring this to life, there was a woman named Harriet O'Brien who really was in the worst of worst circumstances. She had picked up one bad ailment after the next until her whole body started breaking down. She lost the ability to speak, to write. She had one surgery that went awry where her ligament was severed and she was in a wheelchair now. And she really felt she was at death's throes, as she put it. And she was being watched by a doctor around the clock, thinking she could pass on at any moment. And it was at this point when she was introduced to Christian Science healing. And someone started to pray for her, a practitioner, and quickly she started to revive as this different way of operating was introduced to her. And before she knew it, she was feeling well, and she started to think, you know what? Maybe all things are possible to God. Maybe I can even walk again. And she started praying just ardently, week after week, month after month. It didn't come quickly, but eventually she got up out of that bed and started to walk normally. Hallelujah. And at that point, she wanted to meet Mary Baker Eddy. And she went to meet Mary Baker Eddy once, and this is what she wrote about this remarkable little experience. She said, "Transparency is the word that best expresses my impression of Mrs. Eddy. Instinctively, I felt her great love, and I was conscious that no one I had ever seen loved me as much as she did. My entire thought was filled with a spiritual illumination, and there was a glory in the sunshine and landscape as though a breath of heaven had swept earth and enveloped me." Gosh, I love that. And she didn't have the feeling like she just wanted to get obsessed with Mary Baker Eddy at that point. Like, I want to go knock on her door again tomorrow, right? Not that at all. She felt deep within her. In fact, she said she had a question in her heart when she met Mary Baker Eddy, and it was, can I be a healer too? And she said the moment she met Mary Baker Eddy, that question was answered. She hopped on a train shortly after, went back to her hometown in Kansas City, and started a public practice of Christian Science healing. She advertised for over 50 years in the Christian Science Journal, left a long record of healing, and it said on several occasions she helped people revive from their apparent deathbeds where they were seemed to be just going downhill with some ailment. And she was able to pray with them and revive them to a life of health and prosperity. So I want to share with you one last example here that should bring everything home. And before I do, I just want to say, often we're caught up in this feeling of independent agency, that we have the ability to kind of govern things and govern our life. Often before Jesus healed someone, he said he was moved with compassion, like moved with something beyond himself, with a divine love that was beyond a human psyche or personality. And when you just quiet your thought, you recognize that you actually don't create thoughts. Thoughts just appear to you, right? And in Christian Science, we see that each one of us are not little creators. We are creative because we express God's nature, but we aren't independent creators. And thought is actually something that's either coming from God, or sometimes we just seem to hear the noise of kind of cultural conceptions, kind of distortions of what is true. There's this little term used in Christian Science called mortal mind, and mortal mind is used to kind of connote this idea that each one of us have our own little creative mind. It's often the illusion we seem to be stuck in. And it's not until we kind of quiet ourselves and actually listen to recognize that thoughts aren't generated by us. They just appear. And they're either from God or it's some kind of distorted vision of life that's being filtered through material belief and so forth. And we need to reject those thoughts and really hold steadfastly to what is coming right from God, right from Spirit. And I was praying some years ago about how to really love like Jesus loved, how to get outside of self and be moved by this love beyond me. And as I just quieted myself and listened, I felt moved to go to a dark space in my own neck of the woods. And in this case, it was a prison near where I lived in Boston. And I went to this little prison here, and I started to share what's called the Christian Science Bible lesson. Every week around the world, Christian Science churches read a Bible lesson collectively that has citations from the Bible and related passages from science and health that help bring out the spiritual and inspired meaning, help you see life as Jesus did. And as I was reading this Bible lesson to some folks in the jail, there was one man who came to this particular service who just kept raising his hand and interrupting me, and he was just so full of yearning to know the truth. And yet he wasn't buying what I was sharing. He was saying, Nate, I'm not some image and likeness of God, some manifestation of divine truth. I'm just a bad guy, you know. I think it's just in my blood. My father was a bad person, criminal. Grandfather, bad person, criminal. I think it's just in my blood. Well, I had a blood story to tell him, how I was once healed of a hemoglobin deficiency that caused me issues at high altitudes and all sorts of trouble. And I prayed about it, and it was a sense of identity. And I shared with him that analogy of the light beam, of how to identify himself correctly, how to come home to the right conception of who he was in God's eyes. In the book of Luke, there's this parable that Jesus shared about the prodigal son, about a young man who is royalty, who is the son of the king. And yet he's not seeing himself right. He's not looking at himself as royalty and as a part of the king's family and so forth. He's not valuing that. He looks out at life materially, life in pleasure, life in money, life in material sense. And he goes out there, and it's not until he's down in the dust, right? That dirty view of life, that earthly perspective, that he finally repents. He turns around, and he gets walking home. And the father comes out, rushes out, and meets this young boy, and a big party is thrown because the boy is home. Well, that parable, it's all about an identity crisis. This young boy just wasn't thinking about his identity in the right way, and he was getting lured away. And I could see that this young man in the jail, you know, he had been taught by his culture, you know, people with this color skin or from this part of town are related to this gang. You know, they're just not valued that much, right? Or you know, he didn't have the prospects of life in life that other people seem to have, or he wasn't good because look at his father, look at his grandfather. And I started to share with him how he could see himself in the light of divine or Christian science. And that means looking at his life out from God. If God is love, then he is loving. That's his actual nature. If he tries to be hateful, he's going to feel bad. It's going to feel wrong because it's literally wrong. He's designed to do something. If God is spirit, he's spiritual right here and now. He's not boxed in by any cultural belief. God is soul. He's beautiful, creative. God is principle. He's orderly. Everything is in the right place, right time within him. God is truth. He's an honest man, a good man. You know, he's not a liar, not a deceiver. He's a good man. And we started to go through these different terms for God to kind of mine them for lessons, for insights to his actual nature, what really defines him, and what would ultimately feel right within him. Well, he started to internalize that perspective, and you could kind of see him thinking it through. You know, maybe if this is true, I've been viewing my life from the wrong perspective the whole time. And if I adopt this new view, maybe, you know, my life will be full of blessings. And you could kind of see this reorientation, this turning back to God. And he was beginning to walk there mentally. Well, fast forward about 6-7 weeks later, I come back to this jail. This time there's a big crowd. He must have invited his buddies. And he's sitting in the back of that crowd with this beautiful grin on his face. Looked like he was on cloud 9. At the end of that talk, he sauntered up to me nice and slow, or it was actually an informal service again, but he said to me, Nate, you won't believe what just happened to me. He said, when I came into the jail, I had been diagnosed with lung cancer. That's why I came to that service all those weeks ago. I heard over the intercom it was a healing service. I was in a lot of pain, didn't want to get this procedure, wanted to hear about this healing perspective. And he said, I just really started to internalize it. I started to read those books, the Bible and Science and Health. I don't know what happened, but all my symptoms disappeared. My buddies were saying, it's probably a relapse. It'll come back. It never did. And then he was standing in front of me as this paragon, this shining example of what it means to be a child of God. And he got quiet and he said, now, Nate, do you think this can help me in other areas of my life? And I said, of course it can. The truth sets us free. It doesn't just, it's not compartmentalized. Compartmentalization is a material thing where we say, this is one material process, this is another. Everything flows from one source, from God. Then everything is good. There's no conflict. There's no other power, presence, or pressure that's caused by division and dualism, because that sense of dualism is incorrect. And, that was just a wonderful day of healing. And I love that example because it's one that just has so much to do with identity. And I've seen that a lot in my practice of Christian Science. As we get a right conception of ourselves and others, whatever beliefs might be contagious in our culture, whether it's, some kind of, we're possessed by a demon or by stress or, by some fear or whatever it is, we don't have to buy into that right away. And every culture has many contagious beliefs that are flying around that need to be ridded for us to experience our full flourishing and spiritual enrichment. And before I open it up for Q&A, I just want to say one last thing. I know we're coming out of a worldwide pandemic here, and so many people are worried about contagion, and they're just thinking about contagion in a kind of material way. And Mary Baker Eddy, she once said of contagion that whatever man sees, feels, or in any way takes cognizance of must be caught through mind, inasmuch as perception, sensation, and consciousness belong to mind and not to matter. Just think about that for a minute. All feeling, any perception, sensation, consciousness, it belongs to mind, not to matter. And, I just thank the Christian Science perspective so much for bringing this out, because as we begin to shift our thought, we can begin to really find a foundation that is truly healthy. If we're always wondering about getting the right material conditions to be healthy, health is not something fundamental. It's not something we can ever, fully attain. It's not something that's actually true or eternal. It's just a shifting material condition. And real health, the real sense of joy and protection that comes out of founding our life in God, really, it can do wonders to us. And it can also bring about wisdom, because Jesus, even though his life was all about proving eternality, he wasn't doing that in any rash way. He said, suffer it to be so now to certain material processes. And when he was in a quarantine of himself out in the wilderness for 40 days, 40 nights, the word quarantine comes from that word 40, Jesus was tempted by all sorts of things, negative temptations in thought. And one of the temptations that he had was he felt that the devil, this anti-voice, anti-Christ, this non-God voice kind of pushing up against him, was asking him to jump off a temple. Now, even though Jesus had experienced all sorts of miracles, if he jumped off that temple, that might have been risky. He might not have been ready to do that. And a lot of people, Christian Science doesn't force anyone to do anything. It's about what's being gentle to yourself, to find what's right for you in the right time. Mary Baker Eddy talks about gently emerging into spirit. And what is the most loving thing to do for our neighbors? What's the right thing to do for ourselves? These are individual decisions, not something that a church enforces on you. So a Christian Scientist, this kind of healing work should bring about wisdom as well, not just a sense of trying to, by any means, dogmatically come to some conclusion about what's right in a certain circumstance. But it's really about listening to what's the most loving, what's the most God-inspired thing in any moment. Okay, so let's open it up for a Q&A. Let's see what came in. All right, I'm going to check on YouTube here. Someone's asking here how to connect with divine love in order to have the power that heals. Yes, well, it's not something that you need to turn on or off. It's just something that is. And the more that you can accept its isness, the more that you can begin to feel and experience it. There's no off button to prayer. One of the things that the Bible says is that we should pray without ceasing. And so it's to deeply internalize that divine love, it is the basis of reality. It is the substance of everything. And therefore, there is no hate. Now, I had a wonderful insight today as I was praying in preparation for this lecture. You know, Jesus, he makes this remarkable statement in the Bible, such a compassionate statement, where he looked on those who were trying to murder, and he said, "They know not what they do." And he said, "Father, forgive them." And when that little phrase, "they know not what they do," I heard that just in a different way today. It kind of brought out a new coloring that was helpful to me, because I don't think Jesus saw evil in the same way we saw it. Of course, to some degree, he was conscious of what was going on, but he was always seeing the deeper vision of things. Just like, people can recognize the earth looks flat sometimes, and I think Jesus recognized that there appeared to be evil sometimes, but he recognized that it wasn't really going on from a higher perspective. It wasn't ultimately true. And Jesus, I think he really understood who people were. When some people say, know who you really are when you're not feeling like yourself, imagine if they said, know what you really do. When Jesus said they know not what they do, what are we designed to do? Well, we're just designed to love. That's who we are. That's literally our identity. And what we do is express love. That's our very nature. And so if we're not feeling love, or we're asking how do we connect with love, it's just to do it. This is what we do. And when someone's hateful, they know not what they do. They don't know it. They don't know what they're designed to do. And if you just love meaning really trying to see the best in each other, see the image and likeness of God in each other, celebrate the qualities of God in each other. Mary Baker Eddy said, seek your own in another's good. You want to feel happy, feel complete. You don't try just to figure yourself out. You seek your own in another's good by seeing the good in others, by helping others. Then you feel fulfilled. Because love is the oneness of creation. So you want to feel at one with each other. You want to feel at one with life. You can't just stay in your own little box, right? That's just a material condition, a box. You're one with everything. You're one with life. You're one with love. So it's good to recognize that there's no off button to prayer. Love just is. It's what you're designed to do. Mary Baker Eddy once said, true prayer is not asking God for love, but learning to love and to include all mankind in one affection. True prayer is not asking God for love. It is learning to love and to include all mankind in one affection. Well, let's take another question. Can you pray for employment? And someone says they were directed to this site. They felt that it was really an inspiration from God, apparently. That's wonderful. Well, one thing about employment is just that you are employed to do good. God is your ultimate employer. And Jesus prayed to do God's will. He went about doing good right from the inspiration from God. And I remember an experience. I was actually out in the Himalayas climbing out there, doing some high altitude hikes. And I went back over after a year of, I did a lot of training and hiking one year, and then the next year I was going to go back to do even a bigger expedition. And I was so excited for it. I had trained for it. I was all ready for it. I got over there, and there was just too much avalanche danger for it to happen. And I was really feeling bummed out about it. Spent a lot of money, traveled halfway around the world, and this is going to be my big experience of the year. And as I was praying about it, I was with a friend, and just an opportunity arose to help fly a friend of ours to go reunite her with her mother in Hong Kong. These individuals didn't have very much money, and it just really felt like a right and loving thing to do. And we didn't know why we were kind of heading that way, but we wanted to help with this, reunite this family together, and it seemed to be a loving act that we could help out with, and seemed to be the right thing where God was leading us. And then when I got to Hong Kong, it was a wonderful experience, and we were there, and we got to see the family unite, and yet I was praying, okay, but now what am I here doing next? And I started to get worried because I was realizing when I got back, I didn't really have a very stable job, and this expedition thing wasn't leading to more mountaineering potential work or anything, and so I was really praying, and all of a sudden dawned on me, you know what? I think there's a Christian Science church in this Hong Kong city here. And I looked it up, and there was a Wednesday night service about to happen. I rushed over to that service, and it turned out that some managers from the Christian Science Board of Lectureship in Boston, Massachusetts were traveling and were there that night in Hong Kong. I met them, and long story short, it ended up resulting in really a dream job where I ended up writing my own job application to tell them what I could do for them, and it was just so wonderful. And it was really inspired by that sense of praying to do God's will, be led by love, and ask, where is God leading me? And, that is not esoteric. When we really pray to God in our heart of hearts, God, lead me to where you need me. Use me. So often we think of using God. If I get sick, okay, now I'm going to go to God. I'm going to use God to try to make things better. Well, if you're in a relationship with someone, you don't want to just use them. That's not going to make for a good relationship. You want to do unselfish things for them. What can I do for you? And the same is true with God, with life, with love. You want a good relationship with God? Ask God, what can I do for you? Use me. Let me be your expression. That's a wonderful prayer. Okay. Someone is asking, what is Christian Science view on abortion? Well, Christian Science doesn't take any strong stand on that. And this is really something I have to say I love about Christian Science. I grew up going to some different churches that had some strong political feelings about certain issues. And when I looked around at the congregation, I had a feeling like some people in this room have different insights on this. They've been brought to, through their own study of the Bible or their own spiritual practice, they have come to different conclusions. And sometimes I felt that some of the preachers I grew up with were kind of coercing the audience to kind of mold them in their own belief. And Christian Science really doesn't do that. It really tries to stay on the spiritual plane. And those sorts of issues, we can work them out on our own, but we can allow our spiritual inspiration to find what's best. And Christian Science, that little acronym CS, I think often stands for common sense too. It's what's most loving is not always what we initially think. And so we want to be open-minded with issues like that. I studied how to give money in the most benevolent way. There's some wonderful organizations right now who are looking into that. And sometimes the conclusions you come to are not always what you see on the surface, maybe not what you would initially think is the best way to give money, for example, in this case, to produce the most good. And so I think with anything like politics, anything like a stance on legal policy and that sort of thing, Christian Science generally leaves that up to individuals to find their own understanding. and in hope that it will bless humanity and bring out the most good. But certainly with abortion, we want to, not kill in any circumstance, but we don't want to kill the joy of anyone, and we don't want to. So I think a lot of those issues, people think that you can solve them through just a material law, but it's really through a more loving culture and more spiritual upliftment is where you find lasting answers to questions like that. Okay, so another question here. The Bible condemns homosexuality. Does Christian Science teach the same viewpoint? Again, really the same answer. I think people have come to different conclusions about that. But I think what's one of my very favorite lines in the Bible is where Jesus says, "I judge no one." And I think the sense of that was that Jesus really saw love everywhere. But he didn't define himself sexually. He defined himself spiritually. He didn't define himself materially, but spiritually. So I do think Christian Science really focuses on not what our material preferences are. It doesn't matter if I like pizza. It doesn't really matter what I seem to be attracted to in my material life. It's about growing into a more spiritual view of life. And so again, I think Christian Science brings us to a higher perspective where those issues become less important, but also we find solutions that are more satisfactory in those domains where those issues seem to exist. So let me check the email here, see if any questions came in here. Someone's just asking about foster care and how to pray for people who came from a bad background, have bad habits, that sort of thing. So again, I think I actually had a case recently with foster care, and I won't go into it. It was a wonderful healing, but it's probably not the right time to share this in full. But just to realize there's nothing broken or fragmented in anyone's life. Nobody comes from a broken home. Everyone's home is God. And they're not defined by their parents. Jesus said, "Call no man on earth your father." He wasn't just anti-family. He was talking about a metaphysical principle of defining ourselves by God, not by our material conditions, and not by another person. He was anti-personality. He was for understanding our true spiritual individuality defined by God. So I think when we think about kids, it's wonderful to really see where they come from, their true origin, and it's to help them hold on to what is right. I have a little daughter, and we're starting to learn mathematics, and when I teach her 2 + 2 = 4, I tell her to memorize that. That's something that's going to help you your whole life because it's eternally true. It applies to everybody, and it's absolutely true. It's not any bit of that that's untrue. And then if she writes 2 + 2 = 5, I tell her, forget that. That's wrong. There's no substance in that because it doesn't express the principle of mathematics. So often in life, the human mind seems to be impressed with negative experiences, with experiences of discord. But discord is like 2 + 2 = 5. It comes from a false premise. And when we think our home is material, and we think our parents, or in other words, who we are defined by is material, flawed people, yeah, we might start to feel a sense of things wrong in our life. But with that correct identification, that's really going to help this child grow, and they can begin to memorize the truths about God and those little healing experiences they start to have, maybe big experiences they start to have, to let them impress their thought. And sometimes just being impressed by reading about Jesus' life, it sets a wonderful example and gives that true sense of life that comes from Christ's words and teachings, Christ Jesus' words and teachings. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up. I'm just so grateful for the wonderful church here that sponsored this event. The First Church of Christ Scientists in Bournemouth, UK. And, you should go check out their website, fccsb.org.uk. There'll be a replay of this talk there, and they'd love for you to join their service if you'd like to dial in. And I just want to say here in conclusion that our relationship to God is really analogous to our relationship with each other. All of life can be seen in terms of a relationship. And what makes a good relationship? It's having an absolute faith in someone. If we really believe in them, if we're really there for them, have faith in them, that's going to make a great friendship, a good connection. But if we have faith but no understanding, if we don't understand who they are, well, that's not going to be a very good way to have a lasting relationship. Well, how do you understand someone? You take quality time to get to know them. You listen to them, not judgmentally. Same is true with God. We need to really listen what God is saying. We need to spend quality time with God, studying God in the scriptures and so forth. And then also, what's a relationship? Even if we had a lot of faith, we have understanding, but if we have no love, that's not going to do it. You have to have an absolute love for a relationship to be forever strong and beautiful. And what's interesting is the very first chapter in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures says, the prayer that reforms the sinner and heals the sick is an absolute faith that all things are possible to God, a spiritual understanding of Him, and unselfed love. And I think everything we've heard in this lecture, it's really founded on this singular line, that this absolute faith based in an understanding of God and our ability to express God without self or truly unselfishly, that is the basis for all healing. And again, healing is not really changing anything. It's just getting in tune with what really is. And if we want good relationships with each other, we need absolute faith, understanding, and love. And the same is true with our life, our God. So I hope you caught some inspiration in this lecture today. I hope you pick up a copy of Science and Health. If you don't have that, you can jump on christianscience.com or jsh.christianscience.com to read or listen to Science and Health, check out articles written by Christian scientists who are practicing all around the world, or any of the resources in the Christian Science periodicals. So to close here, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I think each and every one of you are an irreplaceable, beautiful idea of God, and we're all destined to feel and understand that completely and wholly. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless.